I'm going to describe two scenes for you. I want you to close your eyes and try to imagine them as vividly as possible. Lupin was a small mountain village draped over the sides of a steep valley. Its high, slanted roofs emerged from the tangle of the forest in a series of sharp and green angles which caught the early light, orderly geometries over the cross sections of pale roads and quaint stone walls. In the summer, the warm, fragrant woods echoed with bird song, but now the autumn was gaining, and the air was bracing, and the only thing to break the early morning silence were the rhythmic blows of the axe. A strong young man, ill-shaven yet, soft of eye and intent upon his work, who was breaking firewood in preparation for the chill season to come. Lupin was a mountain village clinging desperately to the sides of a steep valley. Its high, slanted roofs struggled vainly against the wild flood of forest. Glimpses of defensive, angular architecture and dusty roads and crumbling stone walls, all threatening to be swallowed by the monomania of the wilds. It was a place where nothing ever happened, an emptiness punctuated by the shrill shrieks of summer birds. But now the end of autumn was menacing, and the air was already chill, and the only thing to break the silence were the monotonous blows of the axe. A strong young man, ill-shaven yet, was breaking firewood, eternally breaking firewood, in resignation to the endless tedium of yet another winter. These two scenes describe one and the same place, but from two completely different views, two different atmospheres and moods. They describe, we might say, two literary worlds. Now, world building is usually discussed in the context of fantasy writing or science fiction writing, because in these two genres, there's the necessity of actually formulating complete fictional universes, often with laws and qualities that differ completely from the ones that we're accustomed to in our world. But strictly speaking, every fiction writer is in the business of building worlds. A world is not a series of mere locations. It's not the sum of a given geography or of certain physical laws. A world is rather the intersection of these locations, geographies, and physical laws with two things: the characters that inhabit it and the spirit which infuses it. Any time you enter into a piece of fiction, whether it's set in Arrakis or Middle Earth, ancient Rome, or modern New York, you are entering into a world that the fiction writer has crafted around you. In all the history of our literature, there never yet has been a single book which is set in the real world. Consider the twin descriptions of that little mountain town, Lupin, with which we open. The place in both of them was identical, so too the young man and his actions. Nothing whatsoever changed in the aspect of things. What changed was the atmosphere, the mood, the quality of description, the sense of place. What changed was the expression of a certain literary spirit in the world. We have built here the fragments of two literary worlds, pieces of stories that could be developed in any number of countless different ways. And each of the two descriptions sets the scene for a very different kind of story. The first, for instance, might be the tale of a young man who has returned home after hard adventures abroad. Perhaps he's seen a war in some distant country, and he's finally returned to the village that his heart has longed for all these long years. The second might be the commencement of a modern Bildungsroman, the story of a young man who has come of age in a small village that he detests, and yearns for nothing more than to break free of his hereditary servitude and to set out and see the world. But what I want to focus on here is that the plot is not some kind of independent thing that exists despite the world. The plot depends on the world and not the other way around. So let's come back now for a moment to the well meaning advice which is given to many writers by both writers and editors. After the obligatory hiatus from your writing, these editors and writers will often counsel you to start work on an outline of the plot, of the structure, of the character development of your work. And while this advice is definitely not bad, I think these editors are getting a little ahead of themselves. They're treating secondary matters as if they were primary. But it's not their fault. I mean, professionally, they have to read a mass of writing that comes from different authors. And so they're forced to come at things in this way. If they tried to start with anything more fundamental, they would be at best groping in the dark, and at worst arrogantly attempting to impose their vision on a piece of writing that they did not write. They're to be commended for their constraint. You, however, face no such limitations. This writing is yours, and if you don't know what kind of world it is that you're attempting to build, well, I hate to break it to you, but no one does. It would be premature of you to begin with the structure, plot, pacing, and character development of your book. The structure, plot, pacing, character, and development of your book are all regulated by and determined by what lies underneath them. We've already discussed what's most important here: that spiritual core, that central vital principle around which all the elements of a piece of writing coalesce. But there is, surrounding this core, another inner circle of vital importance to your work. Indeed, we can easily consider it the most fundamental of all of the visible parts of your writing. The spiritual core can't be seen directly. It qualifies more as a feeling, a sense which pervades the writing, a kind of ghost which haunts the contours of your book. It is, we might say, the experiential quality of your work. And this experience expresses itself first and foremost in the substrate to all of the events, actions, or characters within your work. It expresses itself first and foremost in the world of your work. If the spirit is like a light which illuminates the whole of your work, then the world is like a crystal or a glass or a mesh through which that light must pass before it can touch on anything concrete. Everything that happens within your writing happens within the world of your writing. The world determines everything that can happen within your writing. It establishes the parameters of the possible of your writing. And thus also it establishes everything that cannot happen in your writing. It decides whether your writing can include witches or warlocks or flying pigs, whether there really be dragons there at the dark outskirts of the maps, whether a person, by throwing himself at the ground and missing, can fly, whether happiness is possible. All the storylines, all the plots and the plot twists, all the destinies and the mischances of the characters that live in this world are colored by its presentation and its qualities. If you do not adequately give flesh and feeling to this work, then all of the rest will hover over a void, rudderless and adrift, that much less alive. Now, this entire approach to self editing and revisioning, which we've been discussing here, depends on you, the writer, coming back into contact with the first principles of your work. And I would suggest that, in terms of the writing itself, the very first principle that you should be considering is nothing other than the world. But it's not easy to revision the world, and I think that there are two major reasons for the difficulty here. In the first place, I think that it's very easy in the long process of writing for writers to dull or even to forget their basic sense and experience of the world that they're trying to build for their readers. By the time they finish their first draft of their 900-page masterpiece, the sheer size of the text that they've written can easily obscure the inner light of what it is they were attempting to capture in the first place. So we have to find a way of refreshing our original vision of that world before we can get anywhere in this phase of the revision process. The second problem is that the world is ubiquitous to all parts of the story. It is presupposed in every single scene, event, and happening within that book. This makes it difficult both to see and to get a handle on in the process of revisioning. So we're going to confront these two issues one at a time. First, we need to reconquer the sense of the world that we're attempting to build, our world sense. Reconquering world sense demands a feat of imagination. Fortunately, I'm speaking to writers here, so feats of imagination should be your daily fare. It's of paramount importance that you have, before anything else, a tolerably clear sense of that spiritual core of your work, the quintessence that we discussed in the last video. You need to be able to call this to your mind so that you can work from it continually. The light from that inner core has to be shed on everything that you do. This is how artistic unity is achieved. In these exercises, you're going to begin to carry that illumination into your writing itself. So I want you to think of one of the most important places or locations within your book. It doesn't matter where it's introduced in the actual storyline. What matters is that you feel that it's very central somehow to your presentation of the world of your book. And for now, don't think of this place in terms of any of the scenes or the actual events that take place within it. Leave aside your story for now and just focus on this place as if it were a place, an actual real location that you could go to right now. In your mind, I want you to bring yourself physically into that place as completely as possible. Try to imagine it as fully and distinctly as you can. What do you see? What do you hear, smell, feel? What adjectives come immediately to mind to describe your experience of this place? What are the colors, the textures, the sounds, the aromas that pervade it? And what stands out to you most particularly? What's the ground like under your feet? What's the quality of the light? How could you describe it? What about the air or the atmosphere? How about the weather? Can you visit it at other times and other conditions? What's the first thing that you see when you put yourself into this place? And what becomes visible to you only after, when you begin to explore it a little bit more in depth? Is there a particular mood that just naturally occurs in this place, and how would you describe it? I want you to dwell in this space for a little while, immerse yourself in it, explore it, learn to move through it until you know it to its uttermost detail. Use all your senses, your five physical senses, but also your innate emotional sense. And once you feel that you've developed a fairly strong acquaintance with this place, I want you to sit down and take some notes about your experience there. Almost none of what you've actually encountered here will be actually present in your writing. But the more real the place is to you, the more convincingly and masterfully you can render it for your reader. A major part of art of any kind, and maybe in particular of writing, is selection, selecting what you will and will not present. You need to develop a real, actual sense that the world of your story is gargantuan, nigh infinite in extent. It proceeds endlessly beyond the bounds of your book's very narrow limits. You are but shedding a little light on a corner of an obscure continent. This continent includes innumerable people, places, events, and things that are not going to be included within your story, but they form a part of its integral reality. And you have to find a way of hinting at them through your work so that the reader in some way knows that they exist out there, so that the reader can feel the reality of that entire universe surrounding him. This is best done delicately. In fact, a light but decisive touch is far preferable to overdescription. Read through the first pages of any classic in any genre of fiction that you please, and I think that you'll see what I mean. The place and the soul of the place is realized in countless different ways in different pieces of fiction, and to a great many different levels of description. But in all cases, one thing remains constant. The great writers always leave room for their readers' exploration of place, the reader's participation in the act of world creation. You have to become adept at throwing shadows that your reader can then give life and quality and concreteness to. You are a guide in the infinite world surrounding your story. And just as a good guide will draw attention to the salient points and the main stops along the way, so you too must indicate the crucial features of your world. If your reader wants to linger on any of these and consider their details to greater depth, that's his business. That happens off the tour schedule. You are choosing from that boundless mass of material what characteristic and key features you're going to present to your reader's awareness. But if you are capable of only seeing a small number of elements from out of that vast array, then your artistic power and liberty is reduced proportionately. The more of your world that you can see, the more clairvoyant or clear-sighted you become, the more artistic control you will have over its presentation, the more potent you can render its expression. Truly, there are few better investments that you as a fiction writer can make to your own craft than in developing your powers of inner visualization, your plastic imaginative capacities through exercises like this one. So take your time here, and let this practice extend far beyond the paltry minutes that you spend on this particular video. Don't just do this exercise once, but many times, and not just with a single place in your world or your piece of fiction, but in as many of them as you can. Whenever you have a breathing moment in the course of your busy day, rather than picking up your cell phone, spend a moment in one of the places in your world. Explore it anew and at greater depth. Make this a habit throughout your day. This habit will pay you richly, I promise. And before anything, it will give you the means to reconnect with the world of your story after the long toil of actually writing it. Alright, so much for general advice. Let's come back to the actual place that you've chosen for the purposes of this exercise. When you feel that you have a good grasp of this place and you can move through it confidently with a sense of assurance and familiarity, let's look at it through a different lens. I want you to recall now the spirit of your work. Bring that vital core into your mind as forcefully as possible. Think about the feelings that you're trying to capture with your work. Think about the associations that came to you as we went through the exercises in the previous video. Try to let that core infuse your consciousness. And now, with that present in your mind, set foot anew in this place that we're working with. What about your experience here, if anything, changes in the light of this spirit? What stands out to you particularly now that maybe didn't stand out to you before? What sorts of adjectives would you use? What kinds of descriptions would you employ in order to try to bring this same feeling up in another's heart? Take some notes on this. Write down any ideas that come to mind. And once you've done this, and you've taken some notes on your discoveries here, we're ready to turn back to your actual manuscript. Find the first point in your manuscript where this place is introduced, and work through it with an eye toward improving your reader's experience of this place, of the world that surrounds it, of the spiritual essence of your book that you're trying to transmit. Ask if you're describing it well enough. Are your descriptions clear, targeted, simple? Are you, on the other hand, describing too much? Does the reader have to machete his way through your descriptions to the point that he can't even see where you're taking him anymore? Are your descriptions evocative? Do they suggest the mood that you intend? Do they have some kind of connection to the spiritual core of your work? Once you've worked your way through this initial scene, I want you to do the same thing with all of the other scenes that present that same place, if there are any. How do these secondary scenes compare to the introductory? Make sure you aren't repeating anything. Feel free to take things for granted, things that your reader should already know. Or else delicately recall some of the basic motifs that you want to reassert over the course of the story. Or else add something new to your reader's awareness that maybe he didn't see the first time around. This is an iterative process, and it's something that you can apply to other important points of the world development in your story. Begin with the scenes that you feel are the most important from the point of view of introducing and presenting your world to your reader. This will likely include some of the opening passages of your book, or depending on how your book is structured, maybe some of the first scenes that really introduce the reader to the world. Your first revisioning cycle will consist entirely of a revisitation of these places in your book, with an eye toward nothing but world development, world creation. Don't worry about errors in punctuation or grammar, barge right through them. Don't trouble yourself over plot inconsistencies or problems with your characters or their dialogues. Don't bother for a moment about the overarching structure of your book. If you see something that you'll want to revisit later, then make a note of them. And I'd recommend actually keeping an open list of all such things that you can always revisit at some later moment. That will give you the opportunity to write them down so you don't have to worry about forgetting them, but without getting distracted by them over the course of these early revision movements. Right now, I want you to think exclusively about the world of your story, that world sense that underlies every aspect and moment of it, and that you want to try to transmit as subtly and delicately as possible to your reader's imagination. Think about it like a kind of floor under your reader's feet. If you've established a strong floor on a strong foundation, then your reader should be able to move through all of the chambers of your book without even so much as noticing how much support he's receiving. He won't even realize the firm ground he's standing on, save every now and then to admire some beautiful mosaic that you positioned in some particular room. But if this floor is weak and unstable, he will notice it constantly. He will always feel uncertain in his footing, unconvinced about where he stands. He'll be uncomfortable in this mansion that you've made for him, and his chances of moving through the entirety of it, or inviting anybody else to join him in the experience, or perhaps even walking into it to begin with, are going to be reduced proportionately. So obviously, with all of the work in this exercise, we've been focusing on the background to your writing, the backdrop elements which are going to stand behind those things that will more stand out to your reader's attention. In the next video, we're going to be moving decisively into the foreground to take a look at what is to many readers the most central and important element of the entire story. That is to say, the characters. But before we come to that, I invite you to take a gander at the exercises that I prepared for this particular phase of revisioning. They'll give you what you need to hone in on some of the specific problems in your world building and to strengthen your presentation of your universe. With that, farewell for now and buon lavoro. I hope you've enjoyed this video, which is part of the new site's self-editing course for fiction writers. If you would like to gain access to the supplementary material for this course, you can sign up for it for free at the link in the description. This material includes written work for each section of this course, along with several explanatory notes. If you sign up, you will also have the chance to schedule a free consultation call with me to discuss your writing and your self-editing. I'd love to learn about any projects you're working on and to give you feedback from my perspective as a lifelong writer and a long-time professional editor. I hope to talk to you soon.